Hi, I'm Paul Ferranbi, aka IncrediPaul, and welcome to 6 Minute Saturdays, a shorter form of the podcast talking about business, career, getting incredible, but shorter, so just 6 minutes, 6 minutes, like I mentioned. This time, I want to talk to you about imposter syndrome. So I think it's something that we've all heard at some point, but it might not be something that we all necessarily really know what it means or even know how to deal with. And this is something I've worked with for people with coaching or mentorship a lot. It is something that is really prevalent. I think a lot of times it's easy to think that it's more prevalent in people who are underrepresented or in women in STEM and all that stuff. But from researching and doing some stuff to learn more about imposter syndrome for a talk I did a couple years ago, I learned that up to 70% of people struggle with imposter syndrome. 70% of people have struggled with imposter syndrome. So that doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, you're black or white, it does not matter. 70% of people have struggled with it. So I think it's a topic we're talking about and also talking about how to go after it, overcome it. So some symptoms of imposter syndrome. So these are some things, if you are feeling any of these things, you might have imposter syndrome. As far as a sense of being a fraud, fear of being discovered, difficulty internalizing their success, self-doubt, isolation feeling. So it's right there in the name. You feel like you don't belong, like you shouldn't be there. There's no one else is feeling the same thoughts as you. So with all those things, there's some feelings that come out, but there's actually different types of imposters. As I was doing some research on this, that to keep in mind, because we all might not feel imposter syndrome the same way. So one is the perfectionist, there's a natural genius, the soloist, the expert, and the superhero. So five of them that I stumbled across. I'll go deeper into them. So the perfectionist, right there in the name, you criticize yourself for small mistakes and you feel ashamed for a quote failure. So you're trying to do everything right all the time, no failures. You have the natural genius. If something doesn't come easily to you or you fail to succeed on your first trial, you feel ashamed or embarrassed. So this is those people that really a lot of things come natural to them. So if it doesn't come natural, they're consistently failing. That's the sort of imposter syndrome. There's also the soloist. You believe you should be able to handle everything on your own. No one can handle everything on their own. We all need each other, but this is another type of imposter syndrome. Next one is the expert. Before you even consider to work on something, you have to learn everything there is to know on the topic. So the ins and outs, everything. And I think there is something to say about being intentional and learning about stuff, but don't fall into analysis paralysis for sure. Next one is a superhero. And you link competence to your ability to succeed in every role you hold. So you think that because you are able to succeed, that is the only way that your identity is wrapped up in your success. So if you're not successful or you're kind of in the process, then you feel like you don't belong. So those are some types of imposter syndrome, if you will. But I want to talk about how to actually overcome it, because like I said, 70% from a Forbes article I read, 70% of us deal with it. But what are some key ways to combat it? The first one is what I'm doing right now, as far as breaking the silence. A lot of times there's this whole idea of suffering in silence or having shame because you feel like you're the only one that feels like this, or you're the only one that is even thinking about something like this. So you don't want to fess up about having these feelings of like feeling like a fraud because you feel like you're going to feel stupid or no one really understands who you are. I would say that is not true. All of us at some point, some of the most successful people I've met and interviewed, had on the podcast, have had feelings of imposter syndrome, still have feelings of imposter syndrome. I struggle with every now and then. It really depends on what I'm doing, but really understanding that you're not the only one and you do matter. So I have a specific podcast I talk about imposter syndrome in the first podcast. So you do matter, you belong, but definitely break the silence. Next thing is separate feelings from fact. So a lot of times we get caught up in our feelings or our fears. And I don't know if you've heard it said that fears are just false evidence appearing real. So there's thoughts or ideas we get in our heads that are not true at all. So separate the feelings from a fact. So maybe something happened that didn't go as planned, or you thought you forgot something, or you dropped the ball. Don't think about all the stuff that went wrong. Separate what you feel versus what actually happened. There might be some stuff that you couldn't even control that happened. And that's really key, to focus on what you can control. And the next one is really goes along with that, as far as accentuating the positive. It's been said that what you focus on grows. So focusing on the positive. And I know on the podcast I've talked about this, about not having toxic positivity, because there's a kind of positivity that is toxic, and we don't want that. We want to be able to agree or know that yes, things are not going well, but we can be forward thinking about what can I do better in this situation. So with Jason Selk and Ellen Reed, they've been on the podcast, having that relentless solution focus. If you haven't watch either of those podcasts, definitely go back as far as the mental toughness or relentless solution focus podcast and watch those, listen to those. Well, that's all I have time for today as far as talking about overcoming imposter syndrome. Let me know if you want me to talk more about this, or maybe you want to drop some notes or thoughts to me. I can share it in a future podcast. But I hope you learned something from this, as far as that imposter syndrome is something all of us deal with, but doesn't have to be something that keeps us from being incredible. Thanks for listening.